Okay, everybody, good evening. It is 7 o'clock. We will go ahead and get started now. My name is Hillary Silverstone, and I am the Sustainability Coordinator with the City of Deerfield Beach. Thank you all for joining us tonight for an informational presentation on coyotes in Deerfield Beach, something that you probably don't hear too often. But over the last few years, coyote sightings have become more abundant in Deerfield Beach, which has raised a concern to some of our residents that are here in the city. And so tonight we have asked the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission to join us to give us a presentation on coyotes in South Florida and what to do if you encounter one. We know that this has become a little bit of a concern with some of our residents, and so we want to make sure that everybody is educated on what's going on and what to do, if you do come across one. So tonight we'll be starting with about a 40-minute presentation to go over some of that information, and then we'll jump into a Q&A at the end. If you are on a computer, you can submit questions throughout the presentation via the chat box. Make sure that those questions are directed to myself, Hillary Silverstone. The way that looks is there's a little 2 with a colon next to it, and you'll just select the name Hillary Silverstone. So you can submit those throughout the presentation, but we will not be answering any of them directly until the end of the presentation. Once we've gotten through those questions at the end of the presentation, we'll hop to, if anybody has raised their hand or is on the phone, we can answer some of those questions with the expected end time around 8 p.m. If you are on your phone, the way to raise your hand is to press *9, and it'll show on our end that you've raised your hand, and when we get to you, we will unmute you and call your phone number out. And so with that, I'd like to pass it over to Miss Angeline Barker with the FWC, and she will give us a presentation on coyotes.
All right, good evening, everybody. Before I roll into it, I'm going to make sure my screen is working. So give me just 1 second. We'll get this up and running. And Hillary, can you see everything okay on your end?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so once again, my name is Angeline Barker. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your evening this evening to learn about coyotes and hang out with me for an hour. For those of you who don't know FWC, we are the state wildlife regulatory agency. Most folks know FWC from fishing and hunting regulations, but FWC is a lot more than that. We do everything from managing public lands to removing invasive species out of the Everglades to coral reef research to enforcing fish and wildlife regulations. So we're a pretty big, diverse agency. And the part of the agency that I'm working in is fairly small. My job is to assist the public with issues around conflicts with wildlife. Pretty much any terrestrial wildlife species that you can think of in Florida, with the exception of alligators. There's another part of the agency that handles alligators. But any other terrestrial species, my staff and I are speaking to the public about, and we're trying to mitigate those issues. The number one thing my staff and I are talking about to Floridians today are black bears. There are no black bears in your part of Broward County, maybe far western Broward County, but in South Florida, we're talking to folks a lot about iguanas, about snakes, about bats, about foxes, and about coyotes. And that's what I'm going to spend my evening talking to you about today. So I've got a presentation to share with you. We're going to cover history of coyotes in Florida, some ecology and biology, and how to prevent conflicts with coyotes. So I'm just going to go ahead and roll right on into it. One of the first questions we are often asked about coyotes is, why are they in Florida? They didn't used to be here. So there's some truth to that. When the colonists first came to the United States and the Spanish came and settled in Florida, There were no coyotes here, but there were red wolves. Red wolves were the dominant canine in Florida and up and down the eastern seaboard. Red wolves were extirpated or they were locally extinct in the state of Florida by the 1920s. And this is important. Where you tend to have high wolf populations, you tend to have lower coyote populations because wolves predate on coyotes and they compete with coyotes. So with the absence of the red wolf in the eastern US, including Florida, that's part of the reason coyotes migrated into the state. The gray wolf is also important to the coyote story. Even though the gray wolf was historically found in the western United States, where the coyote was historically found, gray wolves were nearly wiped off the map in North America, just like red wolves, due to persecution. If you remember your conservation history or your wildlife history, in the 17th and 18th century, colonists were systematically removing carnivores and predators from the landscape. So bears, alligators, mountain lions and cougars and Florida panthers, bobcats, wolves, and coyotes were all systematically being removed. And we almost wiped out wolves. As a society, wolves were nearly removed. What I want you to keep in the back of your mind as I go through the presentation, everything that we did to wolves that nearly drove wolves to extinction, we were doing to coyotes. So coyotes didn't get a pass. Everything that we did that nearly drove wolves off the map, we were doing to coyotes too. So to go kind of get back to where I started, part of the reason coyotes expanded into Florida was the absence of the wolf due to persecution. The second reason coyotes expanded into Florida was our conversion to an agricultural landscape. So scenes like this, big pastures and meadows and fields, this is where coyotes like to be. Now they can really live in any habitat type there is, but this is what they prefer. And as we started converting to agriculture, especially around the Mississippi River Delta, this also started allowing coyotes to move from the western United States to the eastern United States. So this map that I'm showing you now is from a recent publication by Hody and Case, and this shows you by decade just how fast coyotes expanded their range from the western United States across the continent to every state in the Union with the exception of Hawaii now. That's pretty incredible. Coyotes are the only mid-sized mammal I can think of that has expanded its range this much while being heavily persecuted by people. That goes a lot to say about their adaptability and their survivability. I also want to draw your attention down towards the bottom of the map. Coyotes are all the way down in Panama. If they haven't crossed the Panama Canal yet, they're about to. They're almost migrating into a whole nother continent now, into South America. This is kind of incredible. Again, I can't think of another mid-sized mammal that has done this, that has expanded their range this much while being persecuted by people. Now, a little bit of the history of their migration into Florida. The first research project that documented coyotes in Florida was by Brady and Campbell in '83, and they recorded coyotes in all the counties shaded in green. And what I want you to notice, and if you can see my cursor here, I want you to notice this county. So this is Orange County. This is the Orlando metropolitan area. So Orlando, a heavily developed part of Florida, has had coyotes living there for more than 30 years. Woody and Hardesty in 1990 confirmed coyotes in all of these counties. So by 1990, they were documented in Broward County. Scent survey data done by Dr. Mange at the University of Florida confirmed coyotes in Volusia and Sarasota counties. Carcass data by Dr. Mange confirmed coyotes in Brevard and a couple of Gulf Coast counties. And finally, personal communication with Dr. Mange and FWC confirmed coyotes in all 67 counties in the state. So it does not matter where you are in Florida, whether you're in a heavily urban environment like Tampa or Miami, or if you're in a really rural environment like the Everglades, you have a good chance of running into a coyote no matter where you are. Their most southern observation to date was in 2011 in Key Largo. So there's a couple tricky things and important things about Key Largo, right? First off, that is where the largest feral cat colony in the state is located. So big guess why the coyotes decided to go to Key Largo. There's an abundant food source there for them. The second thing about Key Largo is that obviously it's an island, right? So a lot of people scratch their heads and they go, well, wait a second, how did the coyote get there? They either used the bridges or roadways, or they swam. And as it turns out, coyotes are fairly strong swimmers. This photo that I'm showing you now is from the Lake Worth Lagoon, so up in Palm Beach County. And what I especially like about this picture is that this coyote is so far out there, you can see the channel marker behind him. We know that coyotes will swim and get onto some of our barrier islands this way. So not only Key Largo, but there are coyotes on Sanibel and Captiva, on Gasparilla and Siesta Key, and some of the other barrier islands across the state. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about coyote biology. I don't want to bore you with a lot of biology, but I want you to know a little bit about coyote biology to understand what they're doing in your community. Coyotes are omnivorous, which means they're going to eat just about anything. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. They are highly adaptable. This is one of the most intelligent wildlife species that is living in your area today. Adult coyotes range in size from 25 to 40 pounds, so they're about the size of a mid-sized dog. Home range size for coyotes is pretty variable. So if they're in a natural area, so think western Broward County, think more towards the Everglades, they're going to have a pretty big territory. It's going to be about 15 square miles or so. But in an urban environment like Deerfield Beach, it's going to get real small. Their territory size is going to shrink to only about 3 square miles. The reason why is where there is people, where there are people, there is more food for coyotes. There's rats, there's garbage, there's roadkill, there's raccoons and armadillos, there's pet food, there's bird seed, there's everything they need in a really small space. They don't need a big territory in an urban space. They can find everything they need in a really small area. So from the coyote's perspective, that's pretty smart, right? Would you rather have and patrol a really big territory out west in the western Broward County where you might be finding food every now and then, or would you rather have a smaller territory around people where there's more food and more food that's calorie rich? So for the coyote, it's kind of smart to come into our urban environments looking for food in that way. Coyotes mate in the winter. If you have a breeding pair in your community, they've just mated. They're having their pups in the spring, so right about now, end of March, beginning of April is when they're going to have pups. Litter size is on average 6, but this is dependent on food. And this is the case with most wildlife. The more food that's available to them, the more young they can have. The less food that's available to them, the less young they can have. Here's that key with the urban environment. Urban environment has more food that's calorie rich, which could support more coyotes. So humans have a direct way to control reproduction right now, and that's just by controlling the amount of food that's available, human-related foods. I'm going to talk more about that. And I also want you to know, while coyotes are in the canine family and they are dog-like, there are some differences between coyotes and dogs. One of them is that coyotes mate for life. Coyotes are monogamous. They have really strong pair bonds between the male and the female. The other difference is that the male coyote is involved in raising his offspring. Unlike domestic dogs, where domestic dogs aren't monogamous and the male domestic dog has no parental responsibilities at all, the male coyote does. He is there, he's at the den, he is raising his offspring with the female. And that's pretty unique, not only in the canine world, but in the wildlife world. Now, I mentioned earlier, coyotes can eat just about anything, and FWC was interested in what was sustaining them in Florida. So we did a diet study. We collected coyote carcasses from around the state, mostly roadkill animals. Some were hunter shot animals, some were trapped animals. And we looked at their gut contents to determine what were they eating in Florida. So not surprisingly, the biggest piece of the pie graph here is mammal. So that's things like squirrels and rabbits and rodents. One thing that I was surprised about was that vegetative component, 30%. I did not expect coyotes to rely so much on plant materials. But what I want to draw your attention to is this piece of the pie right here, anthropogenic. So that's human-related foods at 10%. This is why they're coming into urban environments. They're coming in to live around people for human-related foods. This really is the crux of conflicts with coyotes. Now, the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you some pictures of some things that we pulled out of Coyote Gut Contents. I realize it's dinner time. These pictures are not that graphic. I would not do that to you, I promise. If you're queasy, maybe don't look, maybe just listen. But I think it's important for you to see how variable their diet is. So this first picture is from Pensacola. This is dog food. So this is pretty telling right off the bat. Dog food's high in calories. It's designed to smell enticing to get your dog to eat it, and yet this coyote had it in its system. How did he get it? Did someone intentionally feed the coyote? That's possible. Did someone leave food out for their dog and the coyote got into it? That's possible too. Dog food or pet food in general, though, this is a major reason why coyotes are coming into urban environments. Like I said, high in calories, it smells enticing, not just for pets, but for wildlife as well. Next picture. This is cooked chicken that was found in a coyote that was hit by a car in Pinellas County. How do you get cooked chicken? Did he get into some trash? Did he scavenge? Did someone intentionally feed the coyote or throw some leftovers over their fence? It's hard to say, but this slide right here is the take home, human-related foods. This is why, I can't hit this message hard enough. This is why they're coming into urban environments and potentially causing conflicts with people. I also want to point out that coyote that had cooked chicken in the system came from Pinellas County. So that's St. Pete, that's Clearwater. If coyotes can live over there, they can really live anywhere. Okay, next picture. This is the stomach of a coyote, and I want you to notice what color it is, because that color is kind of weird. It's purple. That's a bit odd. We think this coyote was eating pokeweed. Pokeweed is a native weedy plant that has bright purple berries on it. It's real important for songbird migration. This coyote ate so much of it that it stained his stomach purple. And that's some of that vegetative component that I was a little surprised to see. Next picture. This is a McDonald's wrapper. Yeah, a McDonald's wrapper. And I want you to notice where this animal came from. The Ocala National Forest. So this coyote still managed to find human-related foods on a vast area of public land. It's kind of amazing. Next picture. Same deal. Mini eggs wrapper, more garbage, from a coyote that came from a state park. So again, another public tract of land, and this animal still managed to find food that was related to humans. Next picture is probably my favorite. This is a total of 47 small mammals that were found in the stomach of one coyote. And I want to tell you that it takes a coyote about 5 hours to digest its meal. So this coyote ate nearly 50 mice in the 5 hours before it died. That's incredible. From a rodent control perspective, that's amazing from just one coyote. And I think I have one picture left. Yeah, so this is a substantial amount of insects, and I don't know if you can quite read what's on the card because it's kind of small. That says roaches, which totally grosses me out, and that's a really big pile of roaches. But the point in showing you all of these pictures is to show you they really can't eat anything. They are a generalist in that perspective, meaning they can survive almost in any environment. They can survive off almost anything. And this is part of the reason why they were able to spread their range so quickly across the continent, because of this is a survival tactic, for lack of a better term. Now, each coyote that came into that diet study that we look at the gut contents of, we weighed. And this graph is showing you actual weights of those coyotes. From this study, they averaged about 27 pounds in Florida. The reason I'm telling you this is because we're consistently getting phone calls from the public telling us that they're seeing 60 and 70 and 80 pound coyotes in their neighborhoods. More than likely, that's a gross exaggeration of how big the coyote is. Coyotes do a very good job of looking larger than they are. They're lanky, they're tall, and they can really look like they're bigger, especially when they're shedding. But coyotes are about the size of a mid-sized dog. If a person is really seeing a 60 or a 70 or an 80 pound canine in their community, they are more than likely looking at a domestic dog. And there are some domestic dogs that are bred to look like coyotes or to look like wolves, and they convincingly do look very similar to one of those two species in many cases. Okay, so let's talk about some ecology with coyotes. Are there any ecological benefits to having them here in the state? So one potential benefit, or one benefit rather, is their aesthetic value. If you can come across a scene like this, where a coyote adult is tending its young at the den, it is rather endearing. They are really very good parents. Their howls and their yips remind folks who might be living nearby a coyote den. A lot of times it reminds folks of being connected with wildlife, being close to the wilderness, and wildlife surviving in their environment. A lot of folks really don't like that either. A lot of folks really don't like to hear coyotes howling, but some really do. And coyotes absolutely contribute to our aesthetic value of wildlife. Hands down, a lot of us really like seeing wildlife, and we value wildlife, and coyotes are certainly a part of that. And that's important to many of us. Coyotes can also control smaller predators. So there's a theory that Florida has been without, it's not really a theory, but Florida's been without a mid-level canine predator since the red wolf was extirpated in the 1920s. And so some of these mid-level predators, like opossums and raccoons and foxes, have been without somebody over them on the food chain. There are some scientists that think coyotes are filling the role that the red wolf left behind as a mid-level canine predator. Let me give you an example. Let's take raccoons for a moment. You can have as many as 25 raccoons per square mile in some cases, and that's when they're not being artificially fed. And there's one thing raccoons are really good at besides getting in the trash. They are really efficient nest predators. That's a raccoon's MO. They are really good at getting into nests, whether it's sea turtle nests or bird egg nests, that's their thing. If coyotes can help to control the raccoon population, they're indirectly helping some of our endangered and threatened bird species, like bobwhite quail, or like roseate spoonbills, or mottled ducks. Now, this does not mean that if a coyote came across a bobwhite quail nest that he wouldn't eat it. He would totally eat it. But coyotes are not typically looking for bobwhite quail like they're looking for the raccoon that consumes it. Because of this, some scientists think that coyotes may be contributing to a more balanced ecosystem in Florida. So that could potentially be a good thing. Well, what about negatives? Are there negative ecological impacts to having coyotes in Florida? Well, one certainly could be that they could compete with our native predators, like the Florida panther. Florida panther is one of the most endangered species living in the state, or actually, maybe it is the most endangered species living in the state today. So this is something to consider. Coyotes and panthers both kind of like to eat the same thing too. Coyotes and panthers like to eat hog, and they like to eat deer. But coyotes tend to eat younger age class deer and hog, while panthers tend to be eating older age class deer and hog. Also, we talked earlier, while coyotes can live in almost any environment, they like big open pastures and meadows and fields, while panthers tend to prefer dense forests, and they tend to prefer to be away from people, where coyotes would prefer to be living in proximity to people. Additionally, the Florida panther, while still an endangered species, their population has slowly been increasing. We think that if coyotes were negatively impacting panthers, we should see the panther population declining, and we're not seeing that at all. And finally, the panther's close relative, the mountain lion, or the cougar, who lives in the western United States, is well documented to kill and eat coyotes if necessary. So based on all of this, we don't think that coyotes are negatively impacting panthers at this time. But what about the bobcat? Bobcats are around the same size as coyotes. They like to live in the same place. They like to eat the same things. Dr. Marty Main with the University of Florida wanted to answer this question. So he put radio collars on bobcats and coyotes at the Avon Park bombing range in Central Florida. And what he found was this crazy map. So give me a second, I'll explain. What you're looking at in this funky map are coyote territories in blue and bobcat territories in red. And what you're seeing, I'm going to move my cursor here. What you're seeing, like right here, this polka dotted blue area, that's representing a coyote's denning site. And the striped area in red, that's representing a bobcat's denning site. So what you can take away from this are that bobcat and coyote territories are overlapping with each other by a lot in some cases, but their denning sites are not. In some cases, their denning sites are backed up to each other, like right here, but they're not overlapping. So what this is suggesting is that coyotes and bobcats are living with each other. They're coexisting. They're living in the same environment, and they're not out competing one another. Now, no one has looked into this in an urban area, to my knowledge, to see how coyotes and bobcats are behaving or existing with each other. But I have some anecdotal evidence. One of my staff put out a motion-activated camera to try to help a gentleman who was losing his turkeys to a predator. And we got a coyote and a bobcat on that camera in the same evening. So while this is anecdotal, this is suggesting that they're also coexisting with each other in urban environments in Florida. Now, another potentially negative thing about coyotes is they can predate upon rare and endangered species. Now, I just spent a couple minutes talking to you about how they can help some rare and endangered species, right? They can also hurt some rare and endangered species. If a coyote learns to target things like sea turtles, or gopher tortoises, or burrowing owls, ground nesting species, they can really put a hurting on some of those threatened and endangered species. However, managers for those rare and endangered species need to take some considerations into account before removing coyotes. So let me go with the sea turtle example for a moment. Remember I said raccoons are really efficient nest predators, right? And coyotes are predators of raccoons. If there's a coyote that's targeting a sea turtle nest or targeting sea turtles in general, and if that coyote is removed from the beach, it's possible that opens the door for more efficient nest predators to come in and cause more damage, like raccoons. So these are things that managers have to take into account for rather than systematically removing predators from the landscape, because predators do provide an ecological balance to our ecosystems, and they do serve a purpose. Now, what probably brought most of you to our presentation this evening was the human-related conflicts as it relates to coyotes. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about this evening. And I'm going to start by saying, in my opinion, I think coyotes have an undeserved public reputation. And I think they have it because of some myths and misconceptions about them. So one of the first myths and misconceptions is their size, and I talked about that a few minutes ago. They're not nearly as large as most folks make them out to be. They're about the size of a mid-sized dog. The second misconception I want to talk about is packs. So this is a loose misconception. Coyotes absolutely move together. They're territorial, and they only allow the coyotes within their family group within their territory. I really don't like using the word pack when I talk about coyotes. To me, when I think of pack, I think of a bunch of unrelated individuals that get together that do bad stuff. So think feral dogs. Usually when feral dogs get together and they do bad stuff, like running livestock, they pack up, right? But they're not related. Coyotes are a little different. Coyotes are territorial. They only allow coyotes within their family group within their territory. So for this picture that we took in Clearwater on a golf course, what you're looking at here, more than likely, is the alpha male here in the center. And one of the two behind him is the female, the alpha female, and the other is their offspring from the previous year. And they will move together. They will hunt together, especially the adults will train their young, they got to teach their young how to hunt and how to survive. So they will move together. But if you ever see more than one coyote, you should know that it's with its family. It's with its sibling, or it's with its parent, or it's with its mate. Another myth or misconception are coy dogs and coy wolves. So coy dog is when a coyote and a dog breed together and have offspring. Coy dogs are not real common. Part of the reason for it is because their breeding cycles of dogs and coyotes don't really match. Coyotes breed in the winter. Dogs mate in the spring and in the fall. Because their breeding cycles don't match, it can be difficult for them to interbreed with each other. As of now, there is no evidence of coy dogs existing in Florida. And typically a coyote would only choose a dog to breed with if there's not another coyote around. And if you think about it from the coyote's perspective, if a female coyote chooses a male dog to breed with, she's kind of stuck because that male dog is going to go home. That male dog has got somebody feeding him. That male dog has no parental responsibilities, whereas male coyotes do. If that female coyote breeds with a male dog, she's going to lose out on 50% of the parental care, and her young might not survive. Coy wolves is when a coyote and a wolf breed together and have offspring. There is a lot of debate and research going on right now in the scientific community trying to determine how much wolf genes there are in coyotes up and down the eastern seaboard. As of now, there is no evidence that there are wolf genes in coyotes in Florida, specifically because there are no wolves here for them to be breeding with. Disease is another one. So a lot of times folks will think if they see a coyote out during the day that it is diseased, and that is not at all the case. Almost every picture I've shown you in the presentation so far have been of day active coyotes. Coyotes will absolutely come out during the daylight hours if they're not being pressured by people, or if they have young to feed, or if their food's coming out during the day. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't carry diseases. They can, and they do. Coyotes can carry any disease that you would vaccinate your dog for. So they can get rabies, they can get mange, they can get stemper and tapeworms and heartworms. But just because you see a coyote out during the daylight hours, or you see a coyote that's a different color, like this one that happens to be more black in color, does not at all mean that it is disease. It's no wives' tale if you see raccoons and coyotes that are coming out during the day that they're diseased. And of course, Hollywood and Wile E. Coyote always make us think that coyotes are up to no good, but they're really just trying to survive in a pretty tough environment. One other conflict that coyotes can have with people is they can predate livestock sometimes. Now, I'm guessing there's not a lot of livestock in Deerfield Beach, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I can tell you that this is a learned behavior. Not every coyote predates livestock. Only a select few who learn this behavior can. And those who learn can potentially have pretty big impacts on ranchers. There are some things that some smaller ranching operations can do to prevent predation of livestock. One is using good fencing or corrals. Another is electric fencing. all it usually takes is one hit from a coyote or a bobcat or a bear to understand that that's not an area where they're supposed to be, and they learn pretty quickly. One other thing that some ranchers are using now are guardian animals. Things like donkeys and llamas really don't like canines, and they've done a good job of protecting small sheep or small flocks of livestock like this in some cases. However, in my experience and in my work with FWC, perhaps the biggest conflicts when it comes to coyotes is those who live in urban areas and as it relates to pet loss. As a pet owner myself, I don't want to sugarcoat this for you. If your cat is free ranging, it is taking some unnecessary risks and it is open to predation from wildlife. Coyotes get a lot of notoriety for taking cats, and coyotes do take cats, but so do other wildlife. It's not just coyotes that have the ability to predate free-ranging cats. So do bobcats, so do alligators, so do large raptors, so do panthers, so do black bears. Anytime a cat is free-ranging, it is open to predation, period. For dogs, coyotes who are predated, let me back up. Coyotes don't predate small dogs often, but when they do, in almost every case, it is a small dog, by small I'm meaning under 20 pounds, that's not on a leash, that's not with a person, and that's not in a fenced-in yard. A lot of times it's right around dusk or dawn. The little dog goes outside by itself to go to the bathroom. Coyote happens to be there, takes advantage of the opportunity. It's unnecessary. It doesn't need to happen. Pet owners can protect their dogs really by being present, by keeping them on a leash, by going outside with them at night, especially if you have a small dog. All those predators I just mentioned a few minutes ago that will take cats will take small dogs too. You can prevent loss of your pet by keeping your cat indoors or by keeping your dog on a short leash in a well-fenced-in yard or supervised with you when they're outside. And by a short leash, I'm talking a 6-foot leash or less, not one of those retractable leashes where the little dog can go like 30 feet away from you. You have no recourse at all if your dog is 30 feet out on a retractable leash and comes nose to nose with a coyote or a diamondback rattlesnake or a cane toad or a car or another dog. Those retractable leashes, you don't have any recourse to intervene in the case where your dog might be in an unsafe situation. Short leash, 6 foot or less, with you. I want to drive home the fact that coyotes aren't just the only predators out there in urban environments. You remember those trail camera pictures I showed you a few minutes ago where we were trying to help a gentleman determine what was predating his turkeys? And we had a bobcat and a coyote on that camera. We also had a cat on that camera. I want you to notice what time that cat was there versus the time the coyote was there. The cat was on camera about 8 minutes before the coyote showed up. And the bobcat was on that camera earlier in the evening. I don't know if this was the landowner's cat. I don't know if this was a feral cat. I don't know if this cat survived. The point in showing you this is driving home the fact that there are predators, wildlife predators, who are living in your urban communities. If you want to keep your pet safe, by doing those simple things I mentioned, you should prevent nearly all predation attempts by wildlife. Now, a lot of times they get asked, well, what about me? Am I safe from coyotes? And the answer to that is yes. Attacks by coyotes on humans are exceedingly rare. And to put that into perspective, I have broken down coyote attacks on people versus dog attacks on people. So let's talk about it for a second. Between 1970 and 2015, in the US and Canada, there were around 9 attacks by coyotes on people per year. Most of these attacks by coyotes on people were from someone doing something they shouldn't be doing, like giving the coyote a hot dog, or they were the victim of someone doing something they shouldn't be doing, as in the coyote was fed by someone previously, that coyote became aggressive and bit somebody else who was unknowing and unsuspecting. In that same time frame, there were 2 fatalities caused by coyotes in 45 years. Now let's compare that to domestic dogs. There are more than 1,000 emergency room visits in just the United States every day from dog bites. There are more than 5 million cases a year that require medical treatment, and more than 200 people were killed by domestic dogs between 2013 and 2018. The chances of you being bitten by a coyote, especially if you're doing everything right, like not feeding them and not getting between them and their food, is very, very small. In Florida, we've only had 3 people confirmed to be bitten by coyotes, and what's different for us is they weren't directly related to feeding. We had 3 people who were bitten by 2 coyotes, and both of those coyotes were positive for rabies. So do you blame the coyote in that aspect, or do you blame the disease that had ravaged the animal? I tend to blame the disease a little bit more. So Florida is a little different in that aspect. If you look at another developed state like California, most of their bites are related to food, where so far, Florida's bites have been related to disease. Additionally, those 2 coyotes I mentioned earlier that tested positive for rabies were the only 2 coyotes to ever test positive for rabies in the state. Now, you might be asking yourself, can't they just go away? Can't we just get rid of the coyotes? And you probably know the answer to that before I say it. You can't get rid of coyotes. There's a question of would we want to get rid of coyotes because they serve an ecological benefit, but I want to point out again what I talked about in the top of the presentation. Coyotes have been persecuted for centuries by people. We have been doing everything possible as society to get rid of coyotes. We've shot them, we've poisoned them, we've trapped them, we've shot them out of helicopters even. And yet the coyote expanded its range in that time frame to every state in the continental US. That says a lot about their survivability. They're territorial with high replacement, they're adaptable, and they are intelligent, and they are here to stay. And there are several studies that suggest where if you start to try to locally suppress the coyote population, the coyotes who are remaining can increase their reproductive output. This has to do with food and territory. Remember, there's only so much space and so much food that can sustain a coyote. And coyotes are typically territorial, right? They typically keep the other coyotes out. If that territorial resident coyote dies along with its family, all of a sudden, other coyotes are going to start trying to move in, and they're going to start jockeying for position to try to get that territory. And all of a sudden, there's more food available now, right? Because that resident coyote and his family aren't there anymore. So there's more food to support more coyotes. And we've seen this over and over and over again, where coyotes are locally suppressed. All of a sudden, their numbers increase. To put it into perspective, other states have tried to eradicate coyotes for decades and have failed dramatically. Nobody's been able to do it. And again, there's a question of, should we? Because they are providing an ecological benefit to ecosystems. So if you can't get rid of all the coyotes, what happens if you have one problem in animal? What if you have one problem coyote? For example, let's say you have a coyote that's breaking onto your screen and porch for cat food. As a landowner in Florida, you have the right to remove a nuisance coyote from your property. So what's a nuisance coyote? The state defines nuisance as an animal that is about to cause or has caused property damage, is a threat to public safety, or is an annoyance in, under, or upon a building. So for this example, this would be a coyote who's caused property damage. You as a landowner have the right to remove that specific individual. So how do you do that? If you've got a nuisance coyote, how does one remove it? So as a landowner in an urban area, you're probably going to bring in a trapper, or you're going to try to trap the coyote yourself. So one method you may try is to use cage trap or box trap. You might be familiar with this from squirrels or cats. Coyotes are really smart. It's really, really, really hard to catch a coyote in a box trap, even for professional trappers. Coyotes are typically smart enough to avoid this. So if a box trap isn't going to work, you can use a snare. A snare is typically designed like a cable restraint, a noose. It's designed to catch the animal around its neck. This just can't go out in a backyard and be effective. How do you get the animal to walk through it? This needs to go on a pinch point, a hedge line, fence row, somewhere where the animal's moving through consistently. This really needs to be run by a professional, someone who knows what they're doing. Snares have the capability of capturing non-target animals, and they have the potential to be lethal depending on how they're set. So the snare is set and catches the neighbor's dog, that's not going to end well. Or if it catches a bobcat, or if it catches a deer, or a skunk, or a fox. Because snares can catch non-target species and because they can be lethal depending on how they are set, this is really an unpopular option for urban environments. The last option is to use a foothold or a steel trap. I want to go ahead and say this is not a legal option to use in Florida without a permit from FWC. A foothold is a trap that's about the size of your hand. It's designed to catch the animal around its foot. How do you get the animal to put its foot in a space the size of your hand? This one takes some finesse to be able to capture the animal. It really takes a professional. And again, this trap is not legal to use in Florida without a permit from FWC. This trap can also capture non-target species. You can catch a bobcat or a fox or the neighbor's dog in it. With this trap, the animal isn't going to succumb. It's not a lethal trap by design. It's just designed to capture and hold the animal. The point in walking you through these options is to drive home the fact that coyotes are really hard to trap. They are really hard to trap, even for professional trappers, and they're even harder to trap in urban environments. So FWC is trying to promote folks in Florida to prevent problems with coyotes before they start. Because if you are to the point where you need to bring in a trapper, the chances of you catching that coyote are not very good. And then, if the reason the coyote is a nuisance was not addressed to start with, you're going to have another coyote moving in right behind it. And if the reason isn't addressed, let's say the coyote, in the example I gave earlier, broke onto a porch for cat food. If the cat food's not addressed, another coyote is going to come break onto the back porch for cat food too. And you're going to have this repeating cycle over and over and over again. Rather than trapping the coyote, you could just bring the cat food inside and prevent the problem to start with. And that's what we're promoting, is to try to prevent those issues with coyotes before they start. So how do you do that? How do you prevent problems with coyotes? So one of them is not to feed them directly or indirectly. Anything that can attract a dog, a cat, or a raccoon can attract a coyote. And you saw it in the slides I showed you earlier. They will eat dog food. They will eat trash if it's available to them. We strongly suggest and encourage securing garbage in a secure structure, a garage or a shed until the morning of trash day instead of putting it out on the curb the night before. We also suggest putting trash in a can and not in a bag on the side of the road, because that's going to give wildlife more opportunity to get into it as well. Clean up fallen fruit, pet food, and bird feeders. We know that this is what brings coyotes into communities. I would suggest not feeding pets outside at all, but if you must feed a pet outside, immediately pick up the food as soon as they're done and the bowls. Bring it all in. You don't want to leave food out indefinitely for coyotes or for raccoons or for foxes or for any other species. For cats, you're going to want to keep them inside. I mentioned earlier, there is really no way to keep them safe from a lot of risks, from a lot of bad things if they're outside. And being predated upon by wildlife is just one of those risks. And for dogs, you're going to want to keep them on a short leash and supervised when they're outside, especially small dogs, 20 pounds or less. You're going to want to keep them on a short 6-foot leash. There's something else you can do to prevent problems with coyotes too. You can haze them. So hazing is kind of a rough term. A lot of people, when they hear hazing, they attribute it to fraternities, and we should probably have a better word for this. What I mean by hazing is scaring the coyote off. You can give that coyote a negative experience, make it feel uncomfortable and unwanted in your neighborhood. You do not have to let that coyote's presence go unnoticed if he's walking down your sidewalk like he owns the place, or if he's on your driveway. If you feel comfortable, you can establish some human dominance and haze that animal. Any of these options I have listed here are great options that work. Typically, just raising your voice and yelling at the coyote is all it takes to get him to move. But sometimes if they're in an urban environment where nobody's yelled at them before and they're exposed to a lot of other sounds like train whistles and airplanes flying overhead and cars backfiring, you might have to give them a little bit more incentive to move. And any of these options can be successful. That last option down there at the bottom, bear spray, I would not use bear spray unless you're in a situation where that coyote was approaching you in a predatory manner. And this is very rare. Bear spray, you don't really want to deploy it unless that animal is within 15 feet of you. But the nice thing about bear spray versus pepper spray, bear spray comes out in a fog about 15 feet ahead of you, whereas pepper spray tends to come out in a small stream and you have to have really good aim. Bear spray comes out in a fog, so the animal has to walk through it. Bear sprays will work on grizzlies. It will work on coyotes or domestic dogs or bobcats for that matter. It'll work on wildlife. One other note about bear spray. You're going to want to know which way the wind is blowing. It can definitely affect you and your dog if you're walking your dog as well. And again, I would not use this option unless you were in a situation where you didn't have another option. So how do you, if you'd like to know how to haze coyotes, I encourage you to check out our video that's on our website at myfwc.com/coyote. This video is about 3 minutes. We filmed it in Pinellas County on a golf course on how to haze coyotes. I want you to know the person who's hazing the coyote in the video is me. I'm the one who hazed that coyote, and all I did was raise my voice. I raised my voice like I would yell at my cat if he was on the furniture, and I walked towards him with some attitude, and that coyote popped right up and moved away from me, and that's exactly the behavior you want. Now, if you do everything I've suggested, you haze the coyotes, you secure your attractants, you secure your pets, the coyotes aren't moving out. They're not going to leave. They've established a territory. There's natural food there that's holding them in that area. But they are going to start being more respectful of people. They're going to start changing their behavior and come out at night instead of coming out during the day. They're not going to be walking up driveways or down sidewalks. All of a sudden, the dynamic is going to change. They're going to be more respectful of people once they know that we're the dominant ones and they are not. But this needs to be a community-wide effort. If you secure your garbage and your neighbor doesn't, you're going to probably continue to have an issue with coyotes. So, in conclusion, I went a little over my time. I want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'm going to wrap this up. I want to leave you with some facts. Coyotes weigh between 25 and 40 pounds. They occur in every state and nearly every large city in the United States. There are coyotes in Miami. They're in New York City. They're in Denver and Los Angeles. If they can live in those places, they can absolutely live across Florida, and they are. Attacks by coyotes on humans are exceedingly rare. They will kill cats and small dogs if given the opportunity. And they can carry rabies just like any other mammal, but this is also rare. So some advice. Don't feed coyotes, whether it's a handout or it's indirect. And it is illegal to feed coyotes in Florida. You guys have probably all heard about alligators. You know, it's illegal to feed alligators. Once they start associating people with food, they get aggressive. Alligator's brain is really small. It's like the size of a walnut. Coyotes are really smart. This is one of the most intelligent wildlife species in the area. They figure it out a whole lot faster than others that people mean food once they've been fed. Prevent access to garbage and pet food. Keep cats indoors. Have a small dog on a short leash or a well-fenced yard. Follow those hazing recommendations to consistently frighten coyotes away. And in the very unlikely event that a coyote were to approach you in a predatory manner, you'd want to lift your pet or your child off the ground and be prepared to defend yourself. The last thing you want to do, please don't do this, the last thing you want to do if you see a coyote is run. Please don't run from a coyote or other wildlife. If you run, they are going to give chase, just like a domestic dog would. Again, they're about the size of a mid-sized dog. Make sure they know that you're not worth it. Most of us standing between 5 and 6 feet tall. Most of us are weighing more than 100 pounds. That's imposing to a coyote. If you have a problem with a coyote in Florida, please call us. We are available. My staff and I are available to speak to you about coyotes or iguanas or snakes or any other wildlife issue you may have. You can call us at the regional office. That number is on your screen. Regional office is open during business hours, 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. If you have a wildlife emergency, or if you would like to report someone for feeding coyotes illegally, you can report that to our wildlife alert hotline. That number is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're in the position where you need to hire a trapper, we have a list of trappers on our website that you can contract with. But again, remember, coyotes are really tough to catch. But we strongly encourage preventing problems with coyotes before they start. I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to listen to me and to hang out and talk about coyotes. I know I'm a little over time. Hillary, I'm happy to hang around a little late and take questions. Thank you all very, very much for your attention this evening.
Thank you so much, Angelina. It was a great presentation. We did get a few questions as we were going through, as you were going through. Some of them did get answered as you continued, so I might skip over a couple. The first one's actually probably more for me. Is the city doing anything to capture coyotes, and have any been caught lately? And the answer to this question is we follow the recommendation of the FWC, which is that what Angeline went over earlier, if you remove a coyote from an area, others will come in. So no, we have not been trapping coyotes. If a circumstance came about where there was an issue, we would get in touch with FWC for further recommendations. The next question that I have, Angeline, you might be able to answer this, I'm not sure. Do we know how many coyotes are in the Deerfield Beach area?
Great question. We do not know how many coyotes are in Deerfield, nor do we know how many are in the state. There are no population estimates of coyotes anywhere in Florida, perhaps not anywhere in the nation. All indications are that their populations are stable though.
Next question. Actually, we got quite a few questions related to iguanas. And so that question kind of surrounds the idea of can coyotes eat iguanas, and have we seen any impact to iguana populations due to coyotes?
Yeah, the coyotes can eat iguanas if they're fast enough to catch them. Certainly smaller iguanas are going to be easier than larger iguanas, but yes, they can eat iguanas. We have not seen any impacts to iguana populations, though, due to predation by coyotes. That's a great question.
The next question is in reference to the photos that you had showed of the stomach contents. A couple of those pictures, the viewer noticed that some of the products seemed whole, specifically the mice, that they didn't seem like they were digested. And so the question is, do they chew their food? Kind of probably, how do they eat, and is it aggressive?
Yeah, so if the food is small enough, you might recognize this if you have a dog at home. If the food's small enough, they'll just swallow it whole. And the mice in that one picture, yeah, they were all whole, which is kind of crazy too. If it's larger, So if they're, scavenging on a carcass of a deer, certainly not going to eat that whole. They're going to have to tear that apart. But for smaller food, like mice and rats, yeah, they'll swallow it whole just like an owl would. It's kind of crazy.
Okay. So I think you kind of covered this already, but I'm going to ask the question in relation to walking dogs on a leash. If we encounter a coyote, what should we do?
That is a great question. So if you're walking your dog on a leash and you encounter a coyote, what should you do? Your position may change depending on how big your dog is. If you've got a 50+ pound dog, coyote's probably not going to want to mess with your dog. So my dog's about 40 pounds. If it was me and I'm out walking my 40-pound dog, I'm going to be hazing that coyote. I'm going to be yelling at it. I'm going to be encouraging it to leave. It may not leave right away. My expectation for what the coyote does may need to change because I'm out there with the dog. The other thing to consider, and I'm glad this question was asked, you might be near a den, unknowingly near a den. And if you are unknowingly near a den with a large dog, well, any dog, the coyotes might come out and defend it. And by defending it, I'm not meaning they're going to come attack you, but all of a sudden they're going to come out and they're going to look at you, or they're going to walk behind you. They're going to escort you away from their den. That really freaks people out. And understandably, some people will think they're being followed by the coyote. The coyote is wanting more or less to make sure that your dog isn't going to go into their den and mess with their family. So for a large dog, I'm hazing that coyote. I'm throwing sticks at him. I'm throwing rocks at him. I'm making him leave. If it's a small dog, especially a small dog that I can carry, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I might even encourage the dog to start barking at it. I want all of the attention on that coyote to feel uncomfortable and unwanted and to drive it away. What you want to do, whether you have a dog or not, when you're hazing, your goal should be to have the animal to be driven out of your view. You don't want to stop hazing when the coyote turns around and walks or runs away, because they'll learn. They'll learn if they turn around and you stop hazing that, oh, okay, all I got to do is turn around. That crazy person's going to stop yelling at me. You want to keep going until you can't see them anymore, until you're driving them out of your view. And that's giving them that negative encounter with humans. That's what you want them to learn. Anytime they come around a person, they're going to get screamed at and have attention brought on them. That's not necessarily something they're going to want to hang around with. That was a really long answer. Sorry.
Still a great answer. Thank you, Angeline. I think that you covered this a little bit, but are you more likely to encounter a coyote during the day or night, and when are they most active?
They are typically active around dawn and dusk. In a natural setting, you're more likely to run into them at night. In an urban environment, though, you could run into them equally as often at night or during the day. If they're not getting a lot of pressure by people, they're going to be more day active, if that's helpful.
Okay. Next question. Is there a circumstance when we need to be afraid of seeing a coyote?
The only time I would say that you need to be afraid of seeing a coyote is if it might be diseased. Depending on the disease can depend on the behavior or what the coyote looks like. So one of the more common diseases for coyotes is mange. Mange is caused by a mite that burrows under the skin. It causes hair loss. So it's really obvious if they're suffering from mange. They could maybe only have a little hair loss in their tail sometimes, or on the back legs, or they could be completely bald. That's a really severe case of mange. If they have mange, they're not likely to be aggressive, but they're going to be in such a bad condition that they're going to be relying more on those human-related foods because they're uncomfortable. The other diseases that you might want to look, I would be afraid of, would be distemper or mange, or I'm sorry, rabies. Distemper and rabies symptoms look identical to each other. They're neurologic symptoms. You can't tell which one the animal is suffering from without the animal being deceased and testing the brain in the lab. If a coyote has distemper or rabies, it's going to do some weird stuff, like circling. They will stumble like they're intoxicated. They'll attack an inanimate object like a stop sign or a tree. They'll appear emaciated because their throat goes through paralysis and they can't eat anymore. Sometimes they'll salivate. They'll like foaming at the mouth that you hear a lot with rabies because their throat closes and they can't swallow anymore. Any weird behavior like that, that's going to be a little bit more scary. I would suggest if you ever see a coyote with symptoms such as those, where it's neurologic like that, is to call FWC.
Okay, a couple of questions that were a little bit similar, referencing cats. Are they safe specifically on like a screened-in patio or within a fenced area?
That's a great question. A fence, like a screen lanai, I would say no, especially if they're out there by themselves. They're not safe. We don't hear about it very often, but we do have had reports of coyotes busting on the screen lanais. Typically, it's for the cat food, and the cat happens to be there, and they take advantage of that. For a fenced-in yard, coyotes can scale fences that are under 6 foot. So if you've got a privacy fence around your property and it's 6 foot or under, a coyote can still jump it. Your cat can also go over it too. One thing that you may want to consider for fences, especially if it's in that example, a privacy fence, you could put a coyote roller at the top. A coyote roller looks like a rolling pin that you attach to the top of your fence. The idea is when the coyote goes to jump and it's going to hit the top to get some leverage to come over, the roller just rolls them right on back. They're pretty popular out west. I don't know if they're used as much in Florida, but they're very popular, like Colorado, to prevent coyotes from coming into fenced yards. You could also put a strand of electric up at the top too.
Okay. The next question was about fences, but you just answered that. There was just a comment, but maybe something to touch on in relation to new homes impeding open spaces and causing increased viewing of coyotes. Is this something that is accurate?
Kind of. We hear a lot from folks with development that think that coyotes are being driven out of their home and pushed into urban areas. And that's true a lot for some wildlife species, not necessarily for coyotes though. Coyotes like disturbance and they like areas that have been developed. So it's almost the inverse, where there's development happening and where there's people. It's attractive to coyotes. You're not necessarily pushing them out of their habitat, kind of more or less drawing them in, which I understand. I get it. It's counterintuitive to almost any other wildlife species, which is kind of what makes coyotes a little different.
Okay. Next question, and you might not know the answer to this question. Are there any specific places in Deerfield where there that would be suspected of having dens?
Suspected of having dens. I have not seen a report to that effect. Sometimes we've seen them den on in cemeteries, especially cemeteries that aren't visited very much. Sometimes they'll dig out a gopher tortoise burrow and den there. Other times they'll den in a culvert or under a deck, especially of a vacant home. But specifically to Deerfield, I have not heard of any reports coming in that have insinuated about a den. One new thing to know that you might be interested in, if you go on our website, the myfwc.com/coyote, there's a GIS map there where we are uploading, where we're getting coyote calls from the public. We upload that about once a month. So you're welcome to check that out and zoom in on Deerfield and see where we've been getting reports. For the record, we're not necessarily looking for coyote reports because we know they're everywhere, but if you're having a problem with a coyote, definitely call us. And about a month or so after that record, it should upload into the database or into that map as long as parameters are met, like we've got a zip code and so on and so forth. Another really long answer to that question, sorry.
The next question, is this presentation recorded and can we watch it again or share with neighbors? And the answer to that question is yes. It does take a little bit to process the video, but it will be available probably within the next couple of days on our city website and also available on the city YouTube channel. And maybe the last question, unless more roll in, can blowing a whistle be a way of hazing to scare coyotes away?
Yes, it can. If you're in an area where there's a lot of noise, you might want to think about a marine grade whistle, like one you would use on your boat. That might be a little louder and get additional attention. Air horns are also pretty effective. You might want to consider what time of day you deploy your air horn. You know, if it's at midnight, your neighbors probably won't like you very much, but that's another option as well. Some folks like to use a Coyote Shaker, which is just a soda can that has pennies or pebbles or washers in them, so they can take them on a walk and they can shake them real loud. Other folks, when they're walking, like to take a walking stick with them, and that's not to beat a coyote with. A lot of people think that when I say that, so I want to clarify. It's not what a walking stick's for in this context. It's to make themselves look bigger. So if they happen to see a coyote, they could take the stick and they could wave it and make themselves look larger. And that's been effective at hazing them too.
Okay. And that seems like it is the last question. I'm not seeing any hands raised either. So I'm happy to hang out for maybe a few more minutes and see if anyone has any follow-up questions. But if not, that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much, Angeline, for joining us, and all of the residents for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
For anybody that's interested, I did get a question about the website. The city website is dfb.city or deerfield-beach.com. I'm actually going to, I'll share my screen really quick and show you where our coyote page is housed. Just a moment for anyone that is interested. Share. Okay. So if you go to the city website, under residents, down under find is our wildlife management page. And so we do have information on iguanas, which we will also be having a presentation on in 2 weeks. And I do see some hands raised. I'll get to you in just a moment. And then down here at the bottom is our information on coyotes. So it will be shown here. We'll also probably share that on social media, and it will also be on our YouTube channel. So I can stop sharing now, and I will grab those questions. First questions from Gwen Clark Reed. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute now. Hopefully that came through.
Thank you very much for the presentation this evening. And when you say that you don't know of any sightings in Deerfield, am I hearing you correctly? Because I live near the 10th Street Preserve, and folks who have been walking there in the evenings have encountered the coyotes. Also, all along 3rd Avenue, Martin Luther King, we're on across from the school, where we have all of that dense, foliage and stuff in there. We've often seen coyotes there as well. So when you're saying that you don't know of any locations, the residents can tell you those are locations, because we see everything in there. We see the fox, we see the coyotes, and whatever is native to the state of Florida. And my question is between you and Hillary. When you have those types of preserves right in the community, do you think that fencing would help to keep them in that preserve, in that part of the land, rather than out to the community?
Great question. Hillary, you want me to take that?
Well, I will first address, we do know that there have been sightings throughout the city, and that's part of the reason why we did have this presentation tonight. That was something that, that brought us to this point. Specific to adding fencing to our preserves, I believe there are some of our preserves that have fencing. I'm not sure how effective it is unless it has those rollers that Angeline you had described. But I have a feeling coyotes probably would find a way out no matter what. If you can comment on that, Angeline.
Sure. And to the first question about the coyotes in Deerfield, I may have misunderstood the previous question, but I thought they were asking me about dens. So I wasn't aware of the den sites in Deerfield, but we are aware of coyote reports in Deerfield. And I'm sharing my screen, or it was. Hopefully it's still working. So you can kind of see on the interactive map where we have recorded some of the sightings from Deerfield. As far as fencing goes for a natural area, it's really going to depend on how big the natural area is as to whether fencing is going to not only be an economic option, but a feasible option. Coyotes are really good at digging under fences as well as going over. My concern is if they were fenced in a small area, it almost would be like keeping them in captivity. Because there wouldn't be other coyotes to come in and create genetic diversity. There wouldn't be other animals to come in that they could consume. That's really good. I haven't really thought about that quite. I don't know of a large landowner or a large parcel of land that has fenced coyotes to keep them out. Most of the time when we hear of folks fencing, it's on small parcels, like a couple acres or less. But a large parcel, the other thing to consider with fencing is if you're fencing to keep coyotes out, you're probably keeping, or coyotes in, you're probably keeping other animals in too, or keeping other animals out. So there's no ingress or egress any longer of deer or alligators or foxes or bobcats, which kind of makes that environment an island, both through a food standpoint, but from a genetic standpoint too. I'm going to think on that a little bit more. It's a great question.
Our next question is, and our last hand is from Kathy's iPhone. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi.
Hi, Kathy. Yes, ma'am. What's your question?
It's not a question, but I live here in Century Village off Hillsborough Boulevard. I'm the president of Newport H, and there's a canal behind Newport H, and on the opposite side is Oak Ridge F. And adjacent to that, I'm told that many years ago there was a small park set up in here with picnic tables that's all grown over. So we call it the preserve, but it seems to be housing many coyotes right behind us. We see them sometimes during the day. I also hear residents have seen them at night. I don't recall anything ever happening in here. We've inquired about them of master management, and they told us that, basically they're not going to attack anyone. Maybe a small dog they might, but not people. Interestingly enough, when the fire engine siren goes off, that pack or den of coyotes let out the weirdest sound. So I don't know if I can't believe nobody knows about them because they've been here at least 4 or 5 years that I know of. And occasionally we see babies, and they're adorable, but, and we don't see as many raccoons as we used to. So that answered that question. as to where they've gone. And they don't eat the iguanas, I guess, though.
Kathy, I'll go ahead and let Angeline possibly address that comment.
Yeah, so they coyotes will absolutely howl when a fire engine goes by, or sometimes when a train whistle goes. It's kind of like with dogs. Some dogs will do it too. It hurts their ears, and they all are prompted to howl. Yes, you address totally eating. The coyotes are probably taking care of the raccoons. They're probably not eating as many iguanas as we would like. Iguanas are really hard to catch, especially if it's 90 degrees and they're heated up throughout the day, so they can run really fast. And they're big. 4-foot iguana might be a lot for a coyote to take on, but certainly smaller iguanas they could. I'd be interested to know if that property you mentioned had cats there, because if there's a lot of cats there or around there, that could also be what's sustaining the coyotes there.
Okay, and the last question for real this time is Tom Good. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Am I coming across clear?
Yes, you are.
Great, thank you. Angeline, I just got to say you did a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. You just recently showed graphics that pinpointed the sightings of these coyotes and things. And in order for the city to be able to better assist in education, that kind of a graphic is very, very helpful, because then we can maybe place signage within these areas. So what is the best way for people to notify you or your office of a sighting so that that graphic can be better populated?
Sure, that's a great question. Perhaps the best way to do it would be through our Ask FWC system. So if you're on our website, and I can share my screen here if that makes it easier, we have a banner up towards the top where you can choose Ask FWC, and customers can ask us a question there, or they can say, hey, I saw X, Y, and Z at this location. That would be a really easy way for my staff to be able to put that record into our system, which would later populate the map. And that would save folks from having to call too. I know it could be a little tedious sometimes to be on the phone. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Hillary. You did a wonderful job tonight too.
And with that, I think that is all of our questions. I have pasted my email address into the chat for anyone that is left on the call. I'm happy to field any other questions that you might have through our through that email address. If you want to submit an email, and we can send them over to Angeline or answer them in-house. And I will go ahead and end our Zoom call now. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a lovely weekend.